Hey geeks, welcome to another exciting episode of Rockin The Code World with dotNetDave. I'm David McCarter. I'm glad you're all here. I got another exciting episode for you today, and I'm really excited about bringing on my guest today. And I was just thinking about, I usually start each show talking about the weather here, uh, you know, here in San Diego, and usually where my guest lives. And I've been noticing this week that at least in San Diego we've had a really mild summer. So that's why I've tweeted recently, because the rest of the country seems to be either burning up or flooded. So if anybody out there wants to come to San Diego, I'm here. I'll show you around this beautiful city I love living in. I've been living here ever since I've been 19 years old. And so come on, join me, especially those in America that wants to get away from the, the burning, the fire, the flooding that's going around the nation right now. So come to San Diego. It's always nice here. we live in a weather bubble, as one of my favorite comedians says, and it's definitely true. All right, let's get going. So today, my special guest is Arthur Doler. I'm really excited about talking with Arthur today, because we're going to be switching subjects a bit, and we're going to be talking about brain health, and because this is something that I feel that we don't really address very well in this industry, probably all industries, but especially this one. And so I kind of wanted to talk about the brain. I've always been fascinated with the brain. I definitely have not researched it like Arthur has, and I am reading a book from a neurologist. And one thing I was thinking about this morning is he's a pretty famous neurologist here in America, and he says we really don't know much about the brain at this point. He admits that as a neurologist, which I think is pretty cool. So in this show, we're going to try to tackle all that. So show 62, July 30th, almost the end of the month. Let's get going. So I want to give a shout out to my friends in the Ukraine. I really miss you all, and I feel so bad that you are still going through this terrible war in your country. And so I start out each show to make sure that we all kind of remember the Ukraine, and if you can support them in any way, please do. They really need your help to get over this war, and they're going to need a lot of help in rebuilding. And of course, I have selfish motives. I want them to rebuild as fast as possible so I can go back there and speak. I went to the Ukraine in 2015. I loved it there. I've been trying to get back ever since, and so that's probably not going to happen for a while. But I really, really want to go back before I retire and speak. And if I retire, then I'll go there just for fun. But I'd rather go speak and learn more about the developers there, because they're very different than they are in America, at least. All right. Next, guess what, geeks? I went to my first concert in 986 days this week. I'm so excited. You wouldn't believe how excited I was on Tuesday to finally go back and go to a concert, because you probably all know I love music. I love concerts. In the past, I've gone to 3 concerts in a week. I used to go to concerts a lot, and these days things have been slowing down, or they're too expensive, and then with COVID, there wasn't really concerts for a while, and so I was so happy to go back. And so I actually went to see Billy Howerdel. He's the leader and the creator of the very, very famous band A Perfect Circle that features the Tool singer Maynard James Keenan on vocals. And so Billy's doing his own little tour right now. He released a CD recently. He did a tour in Europe, and he came back to the States. And the last show was actually the show I saw. So that's it for the tour. And the really cool thing is I'd like to share is I got to meet Billy. You see me and Billy on the left-hand side there. I got to meet him and hang out with him a little bit and talk with him and ask him questions. And it was really enlightening. And one thing is I really appreciate famous rock stars that are completely humble. I mean, this guy is down to earth. He's from New Jersey, and he's totally down to earth. Well, he answered any question we wanted. He was talking to us just like we knew him. And I really like artists like that, especially somebody as on top of his game as Billy is. And he's even inspired me to change some of my guitar patches in my guitar processing unit here at home that I'll be playing later today. So it was a great show. I loved it. Loved meeting Billy. I loved the people I met there and talked to while I was there at the venue. And so I don't have any concert schedule. I think I might go to one next month, but I don't have the tickets yet. But I'm trying to get back to going to concerts. But like I said, concerts these days are so expensive, and so I kind of have to pick which ones I go to, unfortunately. All right. So don't forget, August 19th, just like 20 days away or so, is the Code Quality and Performance Virtual Conference back on CSharpCorner. Last year for this conference, we held this conference, a one-day conference, for the first time last year. So far, we've had over 72,000 viewers of that conference. I'm so excited. So many people watch it and learn something from it. So CSharpCorner and I, of course, with Simon, is bringing this back in 20 days. So please go register. We haven't picked the final sessions yet, so you still have like a couple hours or a couple days to get that in, because Simon and I need to make that decision like today or in the next couple days. So don't forget, August 19th, one-day virtual conference for free, of course, and where we're going to be focusing on code quality, something that more teams need to focus on, at least the teams that I've reviewed their code, definitely, for sure. So very, very excited about that. I have a new article out on CSharpCorner. Speaking about code quality, it's called Rock Your Code, XML Documentation of Code for Microsoft.NET. I wrote this article because I just see less and less XML documentation of code now, which I think is a bad trend. And so I basically laid out exactly how to do it with all the, I explain in detail all the tags and everything better than Microsoft site does it. So I hope you give it a read, and I hope you'll go back to your work on Monday and start doing this, because you might not want to do it now, but believe me, the developers in the future fixing your code or adding features are going to really want you to do this now, because this is really for their future. It's not for the now. So I hope you give it a read. All right, with that, I want to introduce Art Doler, Senior Software Engineer at Community Culture Stored. Art has been a software engineer for 18 years, has worked on things as exciting as analysis software for casinos and things as boring as bank websites. Yeah, casinos, I think, would be more fun. He's an advocate for talking openly about mental health and psychology in the technical world, and spends a lot of time thinking about how we program and why we program, and about the tools, structures, cultures, mental processes that help us and hinder us from our goal in creating amazing things. And this is why I invited him on the show. So welcome, Art.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Yeah, how's it going? So, this is Art and I were talking about this before the show, and mental health, especially in our industry, isn't talked very much, and I wanted to bring Art on, because he specializes in this, and I recently saw a video that he did at what conference was that?
It was a Nebraska Code. Yeah,
Nebraska Code, and you guys have to go check it out, because it's one of the best conference sessions I've seen. It's so well done, so well presented.
Thank you.
And I'm really interested in the brain, and I think we all need to be interested in the brain so we can make it work better, so we can write better software, right? And
yep.
And me personally, I want to make sure that we take care of our brains, because unfortunately, when we don't, we sometimes do things that are even worse for us. To take, that we think is taking care of the brain, what's actually making it worse, like drinking, right? So that's one of the medications people use, especially in this industry, to deal with things, and that's definitely not the way to do it. So Anyway, so how you doing? How's the weekend going for you?
It's going all right so far. Kind of a break in the heat. It's been, like a lot of places, 100+ degree weather, and then we had a storm last week, so now it's been in the 80s until tomorrow when it will be 100 and something again. So.
Oh, jeez. Man, I feel bad for all you guys in the mid and south of America right now. They're dealing with this. My kids live in Texas. They're dealing with it too. It's going to be over 100 there today. I think they've gone over. Texas typically does this in the summers. They go like 90, 100 days where, it's not under 100 degrees, So, yeah, it's pretty freaking hot there. And
we're not usually that bad, but.
Yeah. And I don't have to worry about that in San Diego, so much so that I don't even have air conditioning. I don't need it living by the ocean, right? So
I'm jealous.
Come out anytime you want to come out. I'm here. I don't think I've said this publicly very much at all, but back in my 20s, I actually was a tour guide in San Diego. So I would drive rich people around and show them all the great places of San Diego. And so, especially not only because of that experience, but, especially since I've lived here, most of my life, pretty much since I joined the Navy when I was 19, I pretty much know everything about San Diego. So I know where to go and I know where not to go. And I know where you get the best bang for your buck and still have fun. And, one of my things is I try to avoid tourists. And so I know where to do that. Tourists are kind of a pain in the butt during the summer, and especially the ones from Arizona. So we call them zonies. They come over here in the summer, and they're not easy to deal with sometimes. So anyway, so everybody, please make sure you ask your questions. Art is the expert on this today, and so please put your questions in the chat, and we'll get them answered as quick as we can. But where would you like to start out? We have let me say the 3 subjects that you picked, and that's naive realism, using your internal dialogue in useful and productive ways. I need more of that. And burnout, I need more of that. So where would you like to start?
Less of that, but hopefully.
Well, I less burnout. Yeah. That's what I mean.
Well, I first want to say, because it's important for me to say, is that I'm not a psychologist or a therapist in any way. Not a psychiatrist. I'm a software engineer. I've just spent time learning about this stuff because, especially the more I get into software, the more I realize that it's a human endeavor at its heart, right?
Right.
And so it's
creative.
Yeah, right? And it is inherently a creative task, right? If it was not creative, it'd be a lot easier to write software.
It would be, right?
Just be, okay, we'll go assemble the wall. Okay.
Yeah.
Everything, it's different every time, even if it's the same software, even if you're installing the same software, it's different from installation to installation. So all of that's a creative endeavor. And also, on top of that, the things we're building are for people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even if we're building something that's a huge, complex, data-driven ML system or whatever, the end people consuming it are usually humans. Mm-hmm. So we have humans on both ends of it. So it's one of those things I've seen software engineers, especially as they get to be senior and start to move toward that, staff or principal level, they just have that crushing realization that in the end, it doesn't matter how well you code sometimes. It matters how well you understand your own brain and the brain of the people that are using your software.
Exactly. That's how we deliver the features that users really want, right? And something that I say a lot, I just released an article a little while ago in CSharpCorner talking about this is, for most of my software life, I feel that my job as a software engineer is to make someone else's workflow better, right?
Yes.
And that's my job. And if I can succeed at that gives me personal gratification, right? And if I succeed, of course, the company makes money and I get to keep my job. But to me, that's really secondary. To me, it's the human, that loves the software. That's what I'm going for. And if I can improve their life or workflow, however it is, I've succeeded. Even if the software doesn't, I feel I've succeeded.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah. And software is a tool, right?
Yeah.
So to that end, I mean, if we can start talking about the first thing, which is sounds like a philosophical term, but it's actually psychological. You know, like Cartesian dualism, but no, naive realism is this concept that we have that because well, let's start this way. There's a lot of your brain that you don't have access to. There's a lot of things going on that you can't really introspect into, that you can't quite assess. You know, there's all kinds of reasons, you know, you do things you're not quite sure why, or you see other people do things and you can't really quite figure out why they're behaving the way they are. But your brain kind of papers over that for you. It like brushes a lot of that under the rug. And naive realism is this mindset that the way that you perceive the world is the way the world is. That when you perceive something in the world and you think about it and you say, oh, that is this, and it behaves this way, and I understand it in this way, that's an objective truth. And that's not actually true for it at multiple different levels. I mean, and going back to the brain thing, like, it's not just that there's humans on either side of the coding equation. It's that literally everything you perceive in the world is filtered through your brain. You know, you don't see the things you think you see. Like, the whole visual cortex has evolved to actually show you very little information, but to end up giving you the perception that you have a lot of visual information. So, like, one of my favorite examples for this is, do you know what saccades are?
No, I don't.
They're rapid eye movements you make. So, like, when you flicker your eyes around, right? Your brain doesn't actually show you the movement during those,
right?
Because you have an inner, an inner ear that, if it conflicts with what's coming in from, the sense of what's coming from your inner ear, that balance organ, if it conflicts with your visual stuff, you start to get nauseated. And so to get around this, the motion sickness that you would constantly feel, your brain actually kind of edits out those rapid eye movements that you make.
Right.
And then what it does to give you the perception that you're perceiving time coherently, it backdates information, and then perceptually makes you think, oh, this happened X number of time ago. So, like, the perfect example of this, and this is something viewers can try at home, is if you've got like a clock that blinks every second, or like a second hand that's ticking, or anything that's like, animated at a periodic nature. If you look away from it for a while and then look back, you'll see it pause for a second. Like, the first tick will take longer. The first blink will take longer. And that's your brain basically going, okay, we're going to take this visual moment and push it backward in the past perceptively. And which is a long-winded way of saying, like, everything you see is mediated by your brain. And if you're in a situation where you're feeling tired, feeling anxious, feeling depressed, any of those things, some kind of negative state, right? Your brain actually is better at remembering states when you were like that previously. And what that means is that you've got this perception of how the world is, so you can get trapped in these situations. Give me a second. I'm going to turn off that auto movement. Sorry.
Well, that kind of reminds me a bit of, one of my favorite user experience people is Mark Miller. I don't know if you know him, and I've known him for a long time. He works for DevExpress, and his talks are really fascinating because he talks a lot about how the brain perceives things to create great UI, right? And some of the things that I always remember from his talks is that sound and vision hits our brain at different times, right? And our brain puts it together so we can understand it, right? Because sound travels at a different speed as light, and so but our brain puts it together. And then he talks about things like, it takes so long if you stub your toe, it takes like 2 seconds for that pain to get up to your brain, right? That's how slow it is from your foot, right? And so that's really interesting things that you need to think about. And the other thing I was thinking about when you were talking about that part was the way we perceive things. And I think that reminded me of like my beginner days. And I'm not as good as I am when I was a younger developer, but one of the things that we have to do is software engineers realize is the world that we're writing for is not the world that we perceive, right? And we need to work hard at putting ourselves in our users' shoes, right? Because the worst software that is created is by people not doing that, right? And this is one of the reasons why when I go to places like my doctor's office or even the grocery store or something like that, and I see them using software, I talk to them about it. I ask them how they like it, and rarely do I ever hear anybody say they like it, right?
I know.
And it's because because programmers wrote it, not, they didn't have a hand in writing that software, right? And so,
right.
Programmers perceive things much differently than other people do, right?
The trick of naive realism is everybody perceives things much differently from other people, right? There's all of these things that you hold for, you take for granted about the world, that you'll be able to compile software and run it and it will behave a certain way, and that of course you can't make a round trip from the database instantly. It's going to take a certain number of milliseconds to go from this place to the other and back. Of course it's going to take time for you to process that, because this isn't, we're doing an NP hard problem here, so we're going to have to do some kind of iterative solution. There are all of these things that you've built up and learned over the course of your career and just as a human in general that aren't the other people's experiences, right? They have an entirely different experience in their head, and they're perceiving things differently, and literally perceiving things differently.
Yeah.
And so it's easy to say, like, well, it's real hard to make a drop down work sometimes the way that you need it to. But you've got to, this is probably one of the reasons that like user interviews are so important. And have worked at places where they just like, yeah, you don't need the users. It's like, okay.
Most places I work with are like that. Yeah.
I get it. It takes time and it takes energy and money, but it's also do you want to build a thing that people want to use?
Right.
Nobody, especially in the medical field, nobody likes those systems.
Yeah.
I literally went last night to get some soda at a convenience store at a gas station near my house, and 2 of their 3 like point of sale terminals were down. And one of the guys is on the phone to the tech support, and the other is like trying to check everybody out. And there's a really long line because there's a really high lottery right now. So everybody was buying tickets for the drawing. It's like, nobody enjoys that experience. Everybody in that place was frustrated and angry. And it's literally caused because something went wrong with the software that someone wrote.
Right.
And so it's easy to look at like a bug and say, well, I can't reproduce it on my machine. That's not worth fixing.
Yeah.
You have to turn around and think about that. But it's the trick of naive realism is that it even gets deeper into the sense of, I am in a lot of ways a default software engineer, right? I am American. I'm white. I have a 4-year technical degree, and I'm male. I have a certain perspective on things, and that it takes work to recognize that isn't the real world. My experience of the real world is not the real world. Perfect case in point, we're starting to get back and do conferences and sponsor things at work. And I'm writing some guides for folks to go like, okay, here's how you engage at a conference. Well, here's how you do, talk, etc. And I was sitting there thinking, and I'm like, I need to get one of my women coworkers to look at this, because the rules for networking as a woman, especially at things like an attendee party, are very different sometimes.
Very different.
The rules for a man,
Yeah. The stories I've heard from women at conferences are just really bad.
Yes.
And so, yeah.
Things like, you always keep your hand over your drink constantly.
Right. Things like that. I've heard worse stories than that, but yeah, it's, and we need to be cognizant of that, right?
Right. But it's also, you can't expect your brain to hold multiple of those experiences in the world. Right. There are certain things we can learn, and certain things that you should learn to be aware of other people's experience, and to, to change your behavior, to be more accommodating to them, etc., to change things in the way you code, the way you work, to be a little more accommodating for everybody. But you can't expect yourself to have the same perspective as somebody who is a woman or who is a person of color, right? they have a lifetime of what it's like in their head, just like you have a lifetime of what it's like to be you in your head. And you can't, this is why representation turns into being important on a team, is because you can't just crib it. Like you can't go, oh, I know a couple things, so I can pretend to know. I mean, we were working on a financial application a while back, and for a company local here in Omaha, and we're building out the auth system, like their authentication stuff, and had to ask the hard question. Okay, so, you know, typically in a financial situation, if you're married, you have a joint account for things like, you know, your bank accounts, et cetera. Sometimes you'll have individuals, but this was like for wealth management, retirement stuff. And pretty clearly you have a joint account, or at least multiple accounts underneath one kind of umbrella account. What happens if they get divorced?
Right.
What happens if it's really nasty divorce? What happens if one person is, you know, engaging in spousal abuse and gaslighting the other person and hiding all the finances from this person so they can't log in and see it? It's like,
right.
You know, what email gets control over the account? How do we manage those situations? And I'm still not sure we did the best we could have at it, but we at least sat down and had the perspective to sit down and try, and would not have without having some perspective from team members on the team who were like, wait a minute. Like,
I've been divorced. Well, 50% in America, right, get divorced.
Right.
So there's a lot of us that, you know, have perspective on what happens when that happens. Right.
Right. So the naive realism also turns into a problem with, well, it enables this cognitive bias called the fundamental attribution error. And for the viewers who aren't familiar, a cognitive bias is not like a logical fallacy. And it's not like implicit bias, which you might have heard about, which is kind of that bias baked in at the base brain or inside of your experience. A cognitive bias is kind of like, if you think of your brain as like firmware, a cognitive bias is like where they take and made some shortcuts to make something happen faster or more cheaply. So like it's like branch prediction inside of a CPU or whatever, right? Where you're going, well, we're going to make some guesses, and most of the time, a lot of the time, it's going to be right. Sometimes it will be very wrong. And so a cognitive bias is these things where your brain is kind of built more or less, or evolved certainly, to behave in certain ways in certain situations. And one of those things is the fundamental attribution error. And what that is kind of the stuff we were talking about. It's this tendency that you have to see your entire situation. So if you exist in the world and you see how you behave, and you know all the reasons why you behave, or at least you think you do. And you say, all right, well, I did that, but that was because, like, okay, I cut that person off in traffic, but that was because I really needed to get to that exit and I'm late for my kid's baseball game and whatever, right? You've got a story about why that happened in your head. But if somebody cuts you off in traffic, they're a jerk.
Right. You get really upset and, you know, bring out your gun and, you know,
well, hopefully not.
Hopefully not, but that happens, you know, and
it does.
It's crazy.
Yeah, but it's this tendency we have to say, well, all of my behaviors are part of this narrative. I have reasons. They're justified. Everybody else's behaviors are because of intrinsic attributes. They're a jerk. They're lazy. They're not smart, right?
Right.
And the reason for that is basically that it's impossible to hold another person in your head. Human beings are phenomenally complex, right? And I mean, in the words of oh my Lord, I've forgotten the name. Like, we contain multitudes, right? Like, we've got even in ourselves multiple kind of versions of ourselves running, and there's no way your brain can manage holding. We can't hold. I can't hold some software systems I work with in my head. There's no way I can hold an entire another human being and everything that they contain. Right. So that means that your brain kind of has to take shortcuts in order to think about other people and to reason about how they're going to behave, right?
Right.
Which
and
is
we try to guess why they're doing what they're doing based on our experiences, not their experiences, right? And that's what gets you in trouble, you know?
Exactly. And I mean, so that turns into things like in retrospectives, right? It'll be if you're having a retro with your team as part of, your normal agile scrum process, and you're looking at why something happened the way it did. or even going through like a postmortem, like having an actual incident happen.
Mhm.
It's real easy with like 5 whys to walk back and be like, well, why did this happen? Well, it happened because this system failed. Well, why did that system fail? Because the maintenance wasn't done. Well, why wasn't the
Mhm.
maintenance done? Because Bob didn't do it. Done. We don't have to go any further. Like we
Yeah.
found the cause. It was Bob.
Yeah.
You know, and walk a step, you know, you walk a step back from that and go, well, why did Bob do it? Well, Bob
Mhm.
didn't do it because he's lazy. Bob didn't do it because he's haphazard and slipshod and doesn't do good work. And not, well, Bob is having his parents deal with cancer right now. Like
Right. Or
there's
he's being
no,
inundated with too much work, right? It's
yeah.
that kind of reminds me of this book I'm reading. I'm close to being done, called The Phoenix Project. And yeah, it's excellent book. I wish they would turn it into like a mini series, to tell you the truth. But you know, a lot of that goes on, you know, in that book, that they had a catastrophic failure, right, in releasing their software, and they were blaming a lot, of course. But then, you know, when they finally got over the blame game, they started, at least the part I'm on now is they're trying to figure out, well, where it came from and why it happened. And one of the features of that book is it's all comes down to one guy, right? One guy had too much domain knowledge of that company, which most companies experience the exact same thing, right? And everything stops with him. And if he can't work on it, it doesn't get done, right? And so that's kind of, to me, kind of like the same thing, is that you have to find out really what the issue is and why the issue is that way, right? So,
right.
you know, and in this case, it's because, you know, he's the only one that seems to know for some reason. But you're right. It could be because, you know, something else is going on in his life. We all have personal lives, right, that affect our program, affect our, professional career, right, and vice versa,
Absolutely.
right. And so, yeah, I
I
think
mean,
we're getting better at doing that these days.
mhm.
But we, of course, have a long way to go before we can really be really better at it, so we don't cause so many issues, right?
Yeah, I'm seeing us get better at it, and a lot of what I'm seeing is people trying to recognize it, but not really not center the emotional elements of it, which is kind of weird. It's like, well, okay, you're dealing with something, so our velocity will be a little lower this week, and not,
Right.
You're dealing with something, so the velocity will be a little lower, and you're going to be a little more anxious or upset in meetings. You're more prone to snap at somebody. Like, there's not always an understanding or a recognition of the emotional elements of it. It's like we can just kind of plan around it, which I don't think you can plan around humans, even in the best of days.
No. Especially for things, you know, that comes up, like somebody ending up in the ER. I mean, you can't never plan around something like that, right?
Even something, I mean, hell, I don't have kids, but I have coworkers who have kids, and they're little accident machines. Like,
Oh, and they're petri dishes for viruses too, right? And
right.
so, I got sick so much after I had kids. Well, after they started going to school, I got sick so much, you know, because they brought every freaking thing in school back home to us, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So you've got an understanding of everybody else's existence and reality. It's the only way to kind of start dealing with naive realism is to cultivate a mindset that your way is not the only way.
Right.
Which is, I mean, by and large, a very useful mindset in general. At least I found it to be.
Yeah. And that also, you know, we're talking about, you know, perceptions and things like that. For some reason, I'm not going to share this story publicly, but, you know, my son, you know, when he was like in 4th grade or so, he got into, something happened at school with another kid. And, you know, my wife at the time and I, you know, got there either on time or early, because I tend to be early at things. And so the other parents came in a little bit later, and they just, as soon as they walked in, they started accusing us of all these things, and they don't know one thing about us, right? And I said, wait a minute, no, you can't say that, because you don't know me. So can you stop doing that so we can have a productive conversation? But they came in the room already made up exactly how my wife and I taught my kid, right, as adults, right? And they were completely wrong, 100% wrong.
Oh yeah.
And yeah.
Well, I mean, I've had conversations in my head before about people. It's like, or arguments really. It's like, okay, I'm going to have this discussion and I'm going to say this and they're going to say that and I'm going to say this. And it never happens. That actually doesn't mean those aren't useful.
Sure.
You know, having that dialogue in your head can help you flesh the idea out, can help you be more ready for the eventual conversation, but it's never going to go that way.
Right.
But it's what happens is this weird, well, okay, the human brain, it thrives on narratives, right? We don't really understand facts. We don't really understand anything. What we understand largely is narrative stories. And the drive for story is baked into us so much that there's this really great experiment. One sec, I got to dig up the name of it. The animation emotion study, where they're showing this Hyder and Simmel. It was in 1944, and they showed this animated short of a bunch of shapes moving around on a screen. And there's a big triangle and a small triangle and a little circle, and then kind of a big rectangle. And the shapes are moving around, and the big triangle's like going like this on the small triangle. And it plays for about 5 minutes, less than that, a couple minutes really. And what is fascinating about it is that after that, you can actually ask people who watch it a question like, well, how did the small circle feel when the big triangle was menacing the little triangle? And they will have an answer for it because it's, I mean, you can make the argument that, yeah, well, they put the emotions in there, and yeah, they did, but we recognize story everywhere. Right. From even these really simple representations. And we've been doing this since before we were humans, arguably. And so what happens is you wind up in a situation where you're a parent and you get called to a school because of an incident with another kid and your kid. And you're on the way to the school and you're sitting there going, why did this happen? Why, I had to leave work. I need a reason why this existed. And your brain is like, here, we've got some reasons. We can make some stuff up. And it doesn't really do it based on any facts. I mean, if you have facts, it will kind of add them in, but largely it's this concept of whether it holds together, right? And it's this weird interplay between actually like the left side of the brain and the right side of the brain in the typical brain layout. The typical brain layout, the linguistic side of your brain is on the left-hand side, and a lot of like the logic and thinking about that kind of stuff is on the left-hand side, and a lot of the emotional pieces are on the right. That's not always true, and it's an oversimplification to say that it is. But what happens is this weird interplay where like the left-hand side will come up with a narrative and kind of chuck it over to the right-hand side, and the right-hand side will kind of smell test it for, does that feel right? Does this mesh with my experience of the world as it's been so far? Like if they had met you before, they might have a better model in their head of who you are. It won't be an accurate one, but it'll be closer. And they might have said, okay, well, if I'm going to come in and this person's teaching their kid all wrong, and they'd be like, well, no, actually, no, David. And he's probably not doing that because he's a nice guy. So they'll ditch that story and try to come up with something else. But in the absence of other information, they're going to arrive at something that says, well, you're an idiot because most of the people I deal with are idiots, which is actually a reason to try to not have that mindset. Because it helps you arrive at some better narratives. But it's kind of goes into the second thing that we were starting to talk about your experiences. And the end result of all of this, the fundamental attribution error and the drive for narrative in the brain, is that it's kind of your job to be out there spreading your narrative because nobody else can do it for you. Right.
Especially not as good as you can. Right.
Absolutely. I mean, I've talk that I give about mental health, and I talk about a story, I tell a story about one of my old coworkers whose name was Josh, and Josh used to fall asleep at work. And it wasn't like just like cute on the desk. It was like head back, snoring, like, dude, what are you doing?
I worked at a place like that. There was one guy that did that. Yeah. He slept most of the day. Yeah.
It wasn't most of the day, but it was definitely like we'd catch him a couple times a day periodically. And we're all like dudes up late playing. I think it was Diablo 3 had just come out or something. Like dudes up late playing video games. Come on, what are you doing? None of us ever asked him like, "Hey, dude, are you having a problem? Is there something wrong? Is there anything we can do
Are
to
you
help?"
okay? Right.
We made up a story about what his behavior was, and then we just assumed that it was true.
We assumed, right?
Yeah.
That word, and that's the one thing I was gonna, say that, one thing I've had to work on in more recent times is assumptions, right? And I've had to train myself that every time I think of an assumption, I have to tell myself it's probably not right, but this is all I know. So I should keep that in the back burner, but not let that drive, my feeling or emotion, because I don't know everything that person is experiencing. So all I can do is assume, right? This happens a lot in personal relationships, right? There many personal relationships I've had where, I don't know if this makes sense to a lot of people, but I felt like I was dealing with somebody without a loaded gun, right? I didn't have all the ammo I needed to properly view their side of things, right? And I continuously felt frustrated because I couldn't figure it out, because probably they weren't sharing it to me. So if they weren't sharing it to me, then all I can do is make assumptions, right? Right. Which is not a good thing to do, but that's the only thing we can do, at least.
Well, it's more to the point. It's basically impossible to stop it.
Right.
Like, because your brain's going to do it regardless. And then you are going to behave based off that assumption, even if you're sitting there telling yourself that you shouldn't be, and then you just feel bad about it. I mean, again, that's the brain takes shortcuts.
It does.
The model we have in our heads is not the real world, precisely because you can't model the real world and can't hold it there. So I have a whole talk on it's called Owning Your Experience. It's about how to talk about this stuff and how to try and express your experience in the world and to communicate it with your coworkers. That one's not up on YouTube, but the basic gist is there's kind of two kinds of language that we talk about this stuff. And one of them, especially if it's mental health stuff, is very clinical, right? Like my official diagnoses are ADHD and generalized anxiety disorder. And I've been diagnosed in the past with depression. Various members of my family have been diagnosed with things like bipolar. And it's, when I give the talk, I give like a whole 7-minute talk about like, Art was born into a family with all of these things. He grew up in a unstructured household. He experienced an aversion toward authority due to, lack of engagement, et cetera. Like this very clinical detached language that we tend to use. And so it's the only language that we have most of the time. And so we come into work and talk about these things about like, oh, I'm, why can't you fill out your timesheets? Well, I have ADHD. That's not a great story for folks. Instead, I can talk about it in an experiential way. And I can say, I can't fill out the timesheets because my brain just won't let me. And they'll say, well, why don't you set a reminder? And I do set a reminder, and it shows up on my phone, and I immediately dismiss it and go back to what I'm doing. And they're like,
I do the same thing.
Not do that? And it's like, no, it doesn't work that way. And, it doesn't always work, but talking about it using this experiential language, talking about what it's like for you to exist, and it's to some extent helping people or coaching people to work better with you. Is really a good way to think about it, because then you can say like, look, instead of, I've had situations before where coworkers behave in ways that drive me up a wall. And I'm sure anybody who's worked in the industry long enough has similar, right? Anybody who's worked with another human in any industry has encountered that. And the best thing you can do is to say things like, look, to center that emotional side of it, right? Because you can't just say, well, that's wrong and you should stop doing it. You want to do that. You want to have especially as engineers, right? We want to have this rational, logical reason for why it's wrong. Yeah. And that's not going to work because in some cases you can't stop that. So what you have to do is turn around and say, look, this is driving me up a wall. What can we do to try and find something that does not drive me up a wall? And have the conversation about not blaming them for the behavior necessarily, but saying, look, this is part, we have a relationship, and that's actually a good point. All of your your coworkers, you have a relationship with your coworker. You were talking about personal relationships earlier. You have one of those with every coworker, even though they're at work. And maintaining and developing those relationships is arguably as important, if not more important, than maintaining some of our personal relationships.
Yeah, I agree.
Because
and how much time do we really spend doing that? Right? Hardly any. You know, because we're focused on other things, and you know that's why this is a bit off topic, but you know, it's been, at least for me, it's been over 20 years since I've even been on a team building exercise, right? And I think those, and because companies, at least companies I work at, don't do them anymore. And I actually did one for this company, you know, over 20 years ago, and it was so successful, you know, that I was so happy that I did it. I kind of forced the company to do it, and you know, pony up money to do it, and the other woman and I who arranged it made sure it was fun and engaging, and we purposely, you know, mixed people from different teams in the teams we were in, right? Because people tend to stay in their own team, right? Whether that's at work or out in the world or race or whatever, and I wanted to break that, and I made everybody, you know, work with other people, with people from other teams, right? And the one thing I remember from that experience is that, you know, the next Monday when we came into work, I noticed a difference in people, right?
Yeah.
I could see it, right? I'm not sure how long that lasted, but, you know, the first day back from that, you know, I could really see the difference in people's eyes, right? And I wish, you know, we would do more things like that, you know, these days. But yeah, it's an important part, like, you know,
I feel like we got burned on some of those where it was, okay, well, you go do a high rope course with some other people, and all you have to do is just go do the course, and everybody will, you know, care more about each other and be a better team. And it's like, that's not.
No. I've heard so many team building exercises my friends have been on. I'm just going, that makes no sense. Like, I think one time the company, their team building exercise would take them to the baseball game. I'm going, okay, that's not a team building. That's going out to a party, basically, right?
You want those moments too, right?
Sure.
Those moments can also be small. Like, it doesn't have to be a huge event.
Right.
You can do those things by making sure you take some time. And actually, this is something we lost when everybody started to go remote, when the pandemic started, and everybody just instantly is working from home. We lost those 5 minutes before a meeting. We lost 10 minutes after a meeting. We lost all of these small moments when you're grabbing coffee and you're just chatting with somebody else. And I'm not saying everybody has to go back into the office.
No.
But you've got to build those things into something. You've got to be intentional about it. And having, you know, my work does that. Like once a summer, we'll send everybody to we have a AAA team here in Omaha, the Storm Chasers. It's one of the Royals farm teams, I think. And we just send people there because the park is like half a mile from our office. But, and that's absolutely part of it. But we also have done things like escape rooms, like virtual escape rooms together. And that's a great way to get people, because you have suddenly a goal.
Right.
You've got a thing that everybody has to work together to achieve. We just, for this the Nebraska Code, we had a booth, and we were like, okay, what are we going to put in the booth? And I said, oh, we could do a JavaScript quiz. And my boss said, well, that's dumb. Do something better, basically. He phrased it better, but it was like, that's not exciting. Try something exciting. So we actually built a version of the board game Operation, like a 2-foot by 3-foot version, about 3 feet off the ground on legs, that ran off of a couple Raspberry Pis. And we used like OXO kitchen tongs to reach in and grab 3D printed pieces that were, each of these things, you were pulling like bad things out of code. People loved it.
Oh, that's awesome. Actually, I'd love to see a video of that.
I don't think we have a video. But there's a couple photos through my Twitter and in my LinkedIn we shared, the company shared, but there'll be a making of a video soon. But the important part of that was going with that was we spent about a week doing that in and around our other projects. And it was about 6 people for about something like 200 hours across all of us. Plus, like $500 for materials and printing and things like that. But what's fascinating is how much everybody gelled as part of that. How much a time period, like you have a deadline and a thing to get done and a couple people to do it. That can really generate some connections with folks, right? That can build teams, connect them with that larger entity. And so it doesn't, I mean, it's fascinating. It doesn't have to be like everybody goes off to for a week to the thing. Those can work great, but it can be something smaller that you're doing, something you can work in regular hackathons, things like that too, right?
Yeah. Well, if you're doing team building exercise, and you kind of remind me of someone at the beginning when you're talking about this, is that, one thing that unfortunately, I think people do probably the more higher ups is, they pick team building exercise that, kind of like you were saying, rope. You're saying something about rope, or or let's say that there's they're going to do team building exercise where you're going to do an obstacle course in a certain amount of time and stuff like that. Well, to me that doesn't work, because not everybody on your team is, number one, wants to do it or isn't even capable of doing it, right? And so you've got to pick something that everybody can do easily, right? And understand easily in your team, and not something that's so extreme that it turns people off, right? Or makes them too competitive. That's the other thing. You get people that are way too competitive and just kind of ruin the whole experience for everybody, right?
Yeah, I try not to make absolute statements, but I will say, if you are doing a team building exercise and it involves competition inside of the team, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. You don't pit each other, against each other. Yeah. That's not a good thing. Yeah.
Well, it's especially when, I wish we had another hour to talk about this stuff. There's all of these, what they call the minimum viable group experiments, which sounds like it's talking about minimum viable products, but it's not. These are experiments that are basically designed to assess what does it take for a human to start saying, well, you're the other and we're my team. And it turns out the answer is basically nothing. We will do this at the drop of a hat. They took a bunch of people and they had them take a test where they showed them a bunch of dots and had them count them. And then they took the results of that, threw them away, and then flipped a coin and said, okay, you're either an overestimator or an underestimator. So half the group is now overestimators, half the group is now underestimators, and it's completely random. It's based on nothing about these people at all. And then they said, okay, here is $5, and here is a overestimator and an underestimator. And you have to assign that $5 to those two people. You know nothing about them. They don't even exist. They're just made up names. And you have to decide where that money goes. And people started, based on that information, to assign more money to the people who were in the same group as them. Overestimator or underestimator, whichever they were, they assigned more money to that person. So it's like, these groups don't exist. They're not real. People don't exist and they're not real. And you're still treating everything like it's a zero-sum game, and suddenly you have to give, you want your team to win. What's even dumber is we'll do this even when we will weight towards our team, even when doing so means that we get less. So like you get an option, like both people get $2.50, or one gets $2 and one gets $1. And we'll pick the one where it's $2 and $1, even though, but choosing the other option, we would get more. Like our group would get more. Yeah. So it's competition is bad juju when you don't want to screw with it in that context.
No. Well, we're almost out of time. I can't believe we barely scratched one topic, and so we're really going to have to come back and get you back on the show and talk about this more if you're willing to. I definitely want to have you come back on, because the one thing I did want to talk about, which seems to be really big and a lot of people are talking about these days, is like imposter syndrome, which I know a lot of us suffer from, including myself. And so I'd like to talk about these other subjects, maybe that someday too. And so I think we're going to have to have you come back on multiple times. But I do want to get to a couple questions real quick. Hey, John, thanks for your comments. I'm glad you think this is a different point of view, which is kind of the point. And someone asked, I think creative things can be dangerous if you don't rest enough time. If you don't rest enough time. Yeah, I agree. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Your brain, the prefrontal cortex takes energy, takes sugar, right? And if you spend too much time and energy on that, you feel exhausted, you feel tired. And especially if you're not if you don't feel like the things you're doing are meaningful or worthwhile, that's a instant recipe for burnout.
Yeah.
Which we can get into at a later date, but it's 100% true.
Yeah. And that kind of reminds me of, we're out of time, so I can't share the full story, but pretty much everything in my life is wrapped around creativity, right? It's either music or, I'm an award-winning photographer. I write software, create software, architect software. It's all creative stuff, right? And I think all of that feeds the other, right? And that's why I make sure every week I do those other things, so it'll help my programmer brain, and it's kind of like an endless loop, right? But with that statement, I also will admit that, even before this show, I take like a half-hour break and just kind of mellow out and just think, try to reset before the show starts. And I even do the same thing before I play guitar. I try to make at least a half an hour before I play guitar to just kind of chill out, start thinking about what I'm going to be doing in a half hour. So whatever's else going on in the world, I can, try to focus in on what I'm about to do in, half hour or so. And so those are things that I do, to try to rest my brain, even though I do like doing creative things all the time. And John wants to talk about imposter syndrome. I'm glad you said that, John. And how do we build teams this way? That's another whole show we can talk about. How do we build teams that way? And like you were talking, Art, about the challenges. I haven't thought about this specifically, but the challenges of not everybody, but a lot of people working remote now, we don't get those 5 minutes of BSing before a meeting or after a meeting, or, we're not sitting around in a lunchroom, talking to each other and things like that anymore. And so,
short answer to that question, like the 30-second answer to that question is, you need to balance there are engineering tasks and social tasks. We habitually focus on the engineering tasks. That's what we put in Jira. That's what we manage. That's what we think of as productivity. Social tasks are just as important. Engaging with people, asking how they are, finding out more about them, working with them in creative and interesting ways, and just hanging out together is also part of building a team. So, sorry, that's a short, real tiny version of how to start building teams that are more empathetic to each other.
Yeah, and that reminded me also of something I wanted to say, but I forgot. And that was, I remember one time, long time ago, I was at a Christmas party or something like that at the Marriott, not too far away from me. And I remember, at one point at the party that, there were some people at the company that I felt were very hard to deal with, real pain in the butt, right? And I couldn't figure out why they were like that, right? And sometimes I think, are they always like that, right? Is this their normal mode of operation, right? Even at home, right? And so, I learned at that Christmas party, at least, that, when I got to meet people outside of work, everybody had a drink or two in them or something like that, but still, it enlightened me to who they really are as a person, not as who they are as a worker, right? And that helped me to understand them and deal with them in the future better, because I was able to kind of get that from that party, because at least this person was like a administrative person or something like that. So I didn't really have any interaction with her on a daily basis. She wasn't part of my team, right? And so I rarely saw her, but the interactions I had with her were just real pain, right? And so that really opened up my eyes and helped me kind of understand her better, and other people at work too, by doing those kind of things. Being the introvert, I'm not really big into doing those kind of, things at companies. But, I think they are valuable, especially if you use them in the right way and not just go there to get drunk and party, right?
Yes.
Yeah. It's not, to me, that's not I mean, yeah, you're there to celebrate. It's Christmas time or whatever, but you're there with your company. And so there's other things you need to be working on than just having drinks. Right.
Yeah. We do a thing every quarter where we pull in all of our remote people into Omaha, try and fly them in, have them travel in and spend a week with them working with their teams in person.
Yeah. And companies should do that, right? Especially now that where a lot of us are remote, right? They should be doing that. And if a company does have an event, they should fly everybody in for that event and not exclude people just because they're remote, right? They're still part of the team, right? Well, I got to let you go because Simon's going to get mad at me. We're over time, but you're more than welcome to hang out afterwards and talk about the show, how you thought about the show. Otherwise, have a great weekend. And I'm really glad that you came on the show. And definitely, if you're willing to come back, I definitely want you to come back on the show because I think we have at least 4 more shows that we need to do with you.
Absolutely.
And so the one thing I ask everybody at the end of every one of my sessions, because life isn't all about coding. What do you do for fun?
This no.
Well, yeah,
learning
investigating the brain could, that
learning about and teaching about this stuff is actually something that I really enjoy. So I speak at conferences for fun. It's more or less a hobby. It's not a cheap hobby, but it's a hobby.
I know.
But I also do woodworking, play video games, work on my house, garden a whole bunch of different things.
Cool. Well, that's great. And I hope you get to do some of that this weekend.
Thank you.
All right. This has been an awesome show. I can't wait to have you back. And so I can't wait for next time.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll see you next time we have you. Wow. That was a great session. Everybody let me know how you liked it. I know there's only a few people watching right now, probably. So all of you watching this recording, please email me. Let me know how you like this subject. If you really like it, I'm going to do more. Well, I'll probably do more anyway, but I'd at least like you're okay with it. So that was a great session. I'm glad I picked Art to come on the show. That's a great pick. All right, I have a new Twitter poll going on right now. This is actually a third poll in a series of 3. I'm asking people. This is the last one, asking, which collection is fastest to go through if you're using a for loop, not a for each. And so I've whittled everybody's answers down to list or array. So I hope you go to look me up on Twitter, real.netDave, and that's pinned to the top of my profile. And I hope you will do that because I'm going to be using it in tweets and other things. So I appreciate it. All right. Come on, PowerPoint. My new article about XML code commenting has a lot about that in there, but everything about that and a lot more, of course, is in my coding standards book. I hope you go pick it up on Amazon right now. Also, for Geek Humor, I was talking to someone about this week, and I thought I'd get you guys to read this article I wrote a while ago. I decided to create a programmer superhero character. His name is Inspector Cody, and I wrote one article so far. I have others that I want to do, and this is the introduction to Inspector Cody and the city he lives in, and the building he lives in, and the bar he hangs out in, and his super powers and things like that. So anyway, I hope you go, if you have a couple minutes to read something maybe fun, I hope you go there. There's a QR code for it right there, or you can just go to that link right there. Also, as always, I hope you will help me help the kids in India, either by buying my code performance book, because 100% of my proceeds from my code performance book goes to the Voice of Slum in India. Other ways you can help the kids in the slums is either go to thevoiceofslum.org and help directly, or I've even created a GoFundMe page that no one's put money in a while. And I will, as soon as you put the money in, I will send it to the Voice of Slum. So I hope you will help me help the kids from India, because they really need our support. And we're software engineers. We can help people. So I hope you will help. All right. We're going to be taking a couple weeks off because Simon's busy with doing other things, but I am so excited to have one of my longtime friends on. I can't believe I got him on, and I'm so excited. Billy Hollis, I've known for a long time, and he's one of the top user experience people I know. Every session I see of his in person is riveting, and I'm going to have him on the show on August 13th. So I'm so happy about that. So I hope you will join me for that show, because you won't regret watching that show. Believe me, you won't. Also, don't forget the Code Quality Conference on August 19th, 20 days away. Not only go register, but you have a couple days left or so to submit a paper. We're going to be picking, Simon and I are going to be picking papers any minute now, I think. I don't know, I have to ask Simon. But I can't wait to have this conference in 20 days, and I hope you can't wait either. Also, don't forget, COVID is, we kind of skirted, in Southern California, at least, we kind of skirted re-implementing the mask mandate in Southern California. So, but we're still having COVID problems. I just actually got 10 COVID tests from the government yesterday. So I'm ready if I ever get COVID. So far, I haven't got it yet. I've been really lucky, not lucky, but I've been working hard not to get it. And so in the meantime, one of the ways you can help your fellow humans by donating blood at your local blood bank. I say this at the end of every show. I'm donating next Sunday. Sundays are the day I donate. So as I always say, if I can donate, you can donate. If I can spend 2 hours on a machine donating platelets and plasma, you can spend 30 minutes donating red blood cells. And it makes you feel better that you help your fellow human. And we all need that, because someday you just might be in the hospital or the emergency room needing blood and wishing there wasn't a shortage. So, and of course, as always, make sure you email suggestions, including requests, who you want to be on the show. I will ask anybody except for maybe Bill Gates to come on the show. But you need to email me and let me know who you want on the show. And with that, I'll see you in a couple weeks.